Hello and welcome to my NTND marriage videos. Today I wanted to talk about the difference between autism and narcissism. There tends to be a little bit of confusion because they're both about self. However, there are some differences that I'm going to talk about today. So autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects verbal and non-verbal communication and social interactions. They may appear self-absorbed and lost in their own world. Narcissism is a personality type, a psychiatric condition, which is characterized by a grandiose sense of self. Narcissists tend to want the whole world to revolve around them. So the first is nature and the second is nurture. So nature is birth conditions, things that you're born with that you can't change, such as hemophilia, sickle cell, black hair, blonde hair, freckles, blindness, Down syndrome, things of that nature. Nurture is how you're raised, affecting who you become. For example, narcissists tend to be derived from either extreme neglect or overindulgence as a child. And it's either, in the case of neglect, this intense need for having that neglect fulfilled. You've probably heard the term an endless bucket, where you can just keep dishing out compliments and such to a person, and no matter how much you give them, the bucket is never full. They never reach that capacity of feeling fulfilled. And on the other hand, if you've got overindulgence of a child, they grow up with this grandiose sense of self, and then in the adult world they can't understand why everybody else is not treating them the way that their parents did. Both neurodiverse and neurotypical people develop personality traits upon upbringing. So you might have either or be narcissistic, or they might have depression, or they might be abusive, or they might be kind and caring. So personality traits can affect both. And there are some neurodiverse people who consider that having things like depression make people who have depression also neurodiverse. But considering that you can have a neurotypical with depression and an autistic person with depression, I don't consider that depression makes you neurodiverse. I think that it's just a condition that both groups of people have. So I've got a list of the differences between autistic people and narcissistic people, and I'm going to read through them just to give you an idea of the differences and how they manifest. Number 1, the Aspergers person does not understand social interaction. The narcissistic person manipulates social interactions. Aspergers do not do the silent treatment. Narcissists use silent treatment as a weapon. And just to interject here, I mentioned in my shutdown video in the comments section that I get a little bit confused with this, because isn't shutdowns the same as the silent treatment? And if it isn't, what's the difference? Is it intent? Is it that the narcissists are using the silent treatment as a weapon, whereas the neurodiverse are just shutting down because they can't cope? I mean, that makes sense as I say that out loud. What are your thoughts? So Asperger's people, you can say no to them and they will be okay with that. A narcissist may punish you if you say no. Asperger's people don't do guilt trips, and narcissist people do. They use guilt trips as a manipulative tool. In saying that, I have had situations with my husband where he'll be coercive. So I'm not sure where that fits in, because to me coercion is kind of using guilt in a sense. Like they'll guilt you into doing something. Anyway, food for thought. Asperger's people don't sit on the pity pot. Narcissists feel sorry for themselves and envious of others' successes. Asperger's people tend to be clueless about the damage they've caused, even though they can be straightforward, blunt, selfish, hurtful, just direct with their words. A narcissist will hurt other people's feelings and just don't care. Asperger's will tend to be generally apologetic about hurting other people's feelings, where a narcissist will play the victim when confronted. Asperger's people tend to lack cognitive empathy, that is, the ability to understand and label a feeling. Whereas a narcissist will just lack empathy and they can be malicious. Asperger's people lack intuition. A narcissist has intuition and they use it to get their supply. They're sort of sucking the life out of people around them supply. This one's funny. Asperger's people are not attached to their feelings. That alexithymia, inability to name the feeling, comes to mind, whereas narcissists are hyper connected to their feelings. So that's a really important key difference, I think, with determining the two. Asperger's tend to be one-dimensional, whereas narcissists tend to have mood swings and they'll adapt and change depending on their situations, and you tend to get a lot of Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In saying that, I feel like that's a little bit like my husband. He's a little bit Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. My own thoughts there. Asperger's people don't tend to blame others, while narcissists blame everyone for everything that's going wrong in their world, and they tend to play the victim a lot. In saying that, my husband does do a little bit of blaming, but in his case, and I don't know if it's similar with a narcissist, but in his case, so for example, if I go back to my needs video, and he was often blaming me for not being able to meet my needs, I think that was him not understanding that he couldn't meet the needs, firstly, and secondly, why he couldn't meet the needs. So it just seemed easier to him, I think, if he just said, it's you, not me, sort of thing. So yeah, that's me playing with thoughts there. Asperger's people want a playbook. They like structure and predictability, whereas narcissists love chaos. They love drama, they create drama, and they want control. They kind of use drama as a way to control everyone around them. Asperger's people are triggered by a lack of familiarity, whereas narcissists are triggered by an attack to their ego. Autistic people have a spectrum that they range from, and narcissists are on a normal range between sort of normal, kind of a standard way of being, to psychopathy or antisocial personality. Asperger's people are not sensitive, while narcissists are highly sensitive. Now, this list I've been reading comes from goodtherapy.org. However, I've added a little something of my own to this list, and you can tell me yay or nay. Asperger's people tend to be introverted, modest, they're not callous, and they give without expecting anything in return. Whereas narcissists tend to be extroverted, they crave attention. They're constantly seeking validation, they're entitled and have a damaged self-esteem, they're envious of other people, and they are perpetual victims. And they generally give while expecting so much more in return. If in fact they really do give, that's, up for debate. So that's pretty much the list between the differences of the two. However, I also wanted to add to this. I watched a video by Dr. Ramani, and she said that people with Aspergers don't have interpersonal and strategic awareness in order to be charismatic and charming in front of others whilst raging behind the scenes. She says they don't have that level of processing. And so I'm wondering then, in the case of my husband who does exactly that, he'll be really lovely to me in front of people. In fact, it is rare for him to rage at me in front of others. I can't even think of a single time it's happened. So he definitely will be charming and charismatic in front of people and then rage at me behind the scenes. So does that mean that he has hints of narcissism? One does wonder. And this is where I suppose a lot of the confusion comes in with regards to the two, is that you could have somebody who's on the spectrum who has degrees of narcissism. Dr. Ramani also says if social interaction evokes shame, then the fallout would be rage, would be anger, not anxiety. She says shame is not a primary autistic trait or Asperger's trait, and shame is driven by what others think about them. And since theory of mind is limited in ASD individuals, the sense of other people judging them badly is not likely to be pronounced. And yet again, in my case, that's exactly what goes on. If you recall that previous time where I spoke about how we'd gone to that gathering, and then after the gathering my husband had sort of been having a go at me because he perceived my behaviour to be embarrassing and therefore shameful in some way upon him, like he looked bad. Isn't that exactly what Dr. Ramani is saying that Aspies don't do? And yet here's my husband doing that. So again, does he have a little bit of narcissistic traits, or can it be that Aspies do feel shame in some regards or feel embarrassed or whatever? Because I know that he's driven by fear. And is that fear an autistic trait or a narcissistic trait? I guess that's what I'm wondering. It's really quite curious. Anyway, love to know your thoughts, of course. Please comment below. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. I hope you found this a semblance of helpful.